also just simply setting goals that, small goals or even a few goals that can be reached and achieved can also make you satisfied with where you're headed. So
Mhm.
not trying to take on, again, the book's called The Millionaire Next Door, and the new one's, has the millionaire in the title as well. Does it have to be millionaire? It doesn't have to be that right now.
That's a good point.
And I think that's really important to remember, that nothing is going to be accomplished if you're not breaking that down into small pieces, and that can lead to happiness versus setting these, not astronomical but really really high goals,
Mm-hmm.
and becoming frustrated, and then you're falling off the track, in terms of building wealth as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
That
number is less
reminds it.
important than actually just living the happiness that you're
Right.
trying to
Right.
live in, and finding that within yourself. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
And knowing that the goal isn't necessarily being millionaire, I think that was a good
Right.
point that you just
Yep.
brought up, that while you say, because one of the things that I thought about reading the book is, does this apply to
Right.
low income communities? Does this apply to, culturally different communities? And then I
Yep.
was thinking, well, it really, yeah. And while they don't necessarily have the same opportunities and aren't necessarily going to be millionaires, these behaviors is going to make anybody anywhere more successful.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think that, especially when you think about, you have to think about what you can take away from this. And, one of the things that, in terms of, being able to apply this research in other groups, because what my father certainly studied were affluent populations. So he was, really focused on, where were really wealthy Americans in the United States. And that's part of the work that he did, primarily for financial institutions. But he found this one group of affluent Americans that built wealth on their own. And that's what, that continues to be what we focus on. But at the same time, we've taken those same factors and we've looked at groups that were, where their average income was somewhere around $35,000 a year, not six figures and things like that. And we see that these same patterns apply. But that's not to say that it's not harder for some of us than others, because we know that there are cultural differences. We know that there are ethnic group differences in a lot of the kinds of opportunities that we have, and that's going to make things tougher. But,
Mm-hmm.
again, we've seen when we control for things like age and income and things like that these factors are still important. Things like being frugal, confident, really owning kind of your financial success.
I thought that was actually one thing that was kind of interesting when I was reading the book. There was one of the statistics was, of the millionaires, none of them had, or maybe very few of them didn't have a house. All of them had a house that was no more than 3 times their annual salary.
Right.
And then the average home price is like $800,000. And I was like,
Right.
well, yeah, that's one thing when you
Right,
make
that's
$300,000 a
sure.
year.
Yeah, and again, that that was one of the things we found in this research. So the data was collected 2015-16, and so certainly home prices increased quite a bit from 1996, but it was still the case that they kind of held to that factor, meaning they weren't going above, in terms of 3 times they were, in their income. So yeah, I mean, that's easy to say, right? Okay, well, that's fine. I'll live in an $800,000 house and I won't complain about it. Like that doesn't apply to everybody. But the fact is that we're seeing that in other populations as well. So,
Mm-hmm.
yep. Yeah, I think too, one of the things, Terry, you and I have talked about related to, related to some of the work that we've done at Data Points, which kind of mirrors, again, the work at the research from the Next Millionaire Next Door, is this concept of a job, of financial management as a job. And that's where that industrial psychology comes in. So, our mindset is really focused on looking at how we as individuals, or you guys, that are a part of the group, that how can you improve, what are the competencies that make someone really good at this, and if I'm not good at that today, what can I do to improve? And so instead of viewing this again as some really overall really high goal to reach, like again, millionaire status or something like, or creating your own business, which for some people that's just not in the cards. You don't want to do that. That's not, you'd rather be, work for someone. Instead, you can kind of break it down into, how can I, take on one of these things and improve? And that's, to me, that's easier. I can take on one goal at a time and not be overwhelmed by it. And certainly you see that in the clinical work that psychologists do as well. But that's another thing to think about when it comes to trying to reach goals related to building wealth.
And one thing that I also realized somewhere along the way is there's, this is all about wealth accumulation. And really there's also the life satisfaction element too, right? So some people are like so focused on wealth accumulation and getting to, $1 million, $2 million, whatever. A certain figure. And then they lose sight of, like, are they actually happy? And maybe you don't need as much out of a particular characteristic and still be satisfied in life and still meet all your goals. But it just looks a little bit different. And you can also be spot on with all of those and accumulate a lot of wealth, but not necessarily be happy too, right? So there's that balance.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can have all that money and still not be happy or satisfied, or still just trying to be reaching that goal. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That was one of the bigger takeaways for me from the book, was just, that money story that I had lived through and created, and analyzing that and taking some of your data point surveys, revealed a certain pattern within me, and then a luck, like something came out of it that said I was, I had fallen into it versus luck. And Tara and I have had this conversation too, where
I've had this conversation with Tara.
I remember that.
Super unhappy with it, but after reading some of the book and just like kind of like seeing how that really was analyzed and evolved, and I've taken back some of my pause to that. I kind of see how that's analytically chosen and.
Well, and two, I think that, and again, this sounds, not quaint, but it sounds like too good to be true. But again,